On a narrow stretch of Powerline Pass Trail, southeast of Anchorage, late July, Renee Barker is whispering to her two children to stop moving. Through the chest-high fireweed and Devil's Club, a low, guttural huff repeats twice. Then the silhouette of a large sow grizzly materializes 30 yards uphill, two spring cubs pressed tight against her flank. The family is frozen. Behind them, the only clear line back to the trailhead. In front of them, a patch of ripe salmon berries, and the bear that was already feeding on it. That morning had started the way dozens of mornings before it had started. David Barker, 44, and his wife Renee, 41, loaded their two children into the family SUV and drove out from their hillside neighborhood in South Anchorage. Aiden was 12. Maisie was 9. Both had made this drive so many times they didn't bother looking out the windows anymore. The destination was the first 2 miles of the Powerline Pass corridor in Chugach State Park, a broad, familiar stretch of powerline clearing that the family used every summer to gather highbush cranberries and salmon berries. They brought buckets, sunscreen, and the easy confidence of people returning to a place they considered theirs. And in a sense, it was. Powerline Pass is one of the most heavily trafficked routes in the entire Anchorage municipality. On any given summer weekend, the trail hosts a steady current of runners, mountain bikers, dog walkers, and families exactly like the Barkers. The parking area fills early. You can hear conversations carrying across the powerline clearing from a quarter-mile away. It does not feel like wilderness. It feels like a neighborhood greenway that happens to sit at the edge of one of the largest continuous tracts of bear habitat in North America. But before we break down the specific bear spray mechanics that saved the Barkers, quick moment here. If this kind of detailed, research-driven analysis of what actually happens in these encounters is useful to you, if knowing the difference between a jaw pop and a bluff charge might matter the next time you're on a trail in bear country, then hitting subscribe is how you make sure these cases keep showing up in your feed. A like helps too. It tells the algorithm this isn't just sensationalism, it's education worth sharing. All right, back to what the Barkers did wrong before they ever left the trailhead. That feeling, that sense of safety granted by foot traffic and familiarity, is precisely what the Barkers carried with them that morning. And it shaped every decision they made. David had packed a single canister of counter-assault bear spray. It sat in the side pocket of his day pack, behind a water bottle, under a buckled compression strap. He had purchased it 2 seasons earlier and had never once rehearsed drawing it. He had never timed how long it took to reach back, unclip the strap, pull the canister free, flip the safety tab, and aim. Neither David nor Renee carried bear bells. The children wore earbuds, Aiden listening to music, Maisie to a podcast, a small detail that sealed off 2 sets of ears from every ambient sound the forest produces. The snap of a branch, the rustle of something heavy shifting through underbrush, the low, warning huff of a bear that has noticed you before you have noticed it. None of this felt like negligence. It felt normal. It felt like every other trip. What the Barkers did not account for, what most visitors to Chugach State Park in midsummer do not account for, is a biological calendar that has nothing to do with trail popularity. July and August mark the peak of hyperphagia overlap in this region, the period when bears enter a phase of compulsive, aggressive feeding to build fat reserves before denning. Sow grizzlies with cubs of the year are especially driven during this window, foraging on the same berry corridors that draw human visitors to the park. A nursing mother on a food source is defending not just territory, but caloric survival for herself and her young. Surprising one at close range is among the highest risk encounters a hiker can face in bear country. The berry bushes do not belong to the people who pick them. They never did. At approximately 11:40 that morning, the Barkers spotted a dense, heavy cluster of ripe salmon berries just off the main trail, on the north side of the power line clearing. To reach it, they stepped off the open corridor and pushed into a thick stand of alder. Within a few paces, the broad sight lines of the power line trail collapsed around them. Devil's Club and alder closed in overhead. Visibility dropped to under 15 feet. The children's earbuds were still in. The bear spray was still buried in David's pack. And somewhere ahead of them, just beyond the wall of green, a sow grizzly and 2 cubs of the year were already feeding on the same patch of salmonberries the Barkers were walking toward. The alder closed around them like a tunnel. Every step the Barkers took away from the power line corridor shrank their world a little more. The chest-high brush swallowing the open sky. The ambient chatter of hikers and cyclists on the main trail fading to a muffle, then to nothing. Visibility collapsed to 15 feet in every direction. The salmonberry cluster they were heading for was just ahead, heavy with ripe fruit, and the family pressed toward it single file along a narrow game trail stamped into the undergrowth. Aiden was slightly ahead of the others, bucket in hand, moving with the easy carelessness of a 12-year-old who has walked trails like this one his entire life. He rounded a shallow bend in the game trail and stopped. 20 feet away, 2 cubs of the year were feeding on the same salmonberry patch. They were small, spring-born, probably 60 pounds each, and their muzzles were stained dark with juice. For a fraction of a second, the scene was almost gentle. Then the air behind them shifted. The sow had been obscured behind a tangle of alder trunks, invisible until she wasn't. She registered the boy's sudden appearance, and what came out of her was not a growl. It was a jaw pop, a sharp, percussive crack made by slamming the teeth together, the signature warning vocalization of an agitated grizzly. In the context of a sow with cubs, a jaw pop is not a bluff signal. It is not posturing. It is a final boundary announcement. It means the bear considers the threat immediate, and the window for de-escalation has almost closed. Aiden did not process the sound. His body processed it for him. He stumbled backward, his heel catching a root, and fell into Renee directly behind him. Renee screamed. It was involuntary, a raw, sharp burst of sound that cut through the dense brush like a gunshot. That was enough. The combination of sudden movement and explosive noise tripped the sow's charge. She came off her position with a speed that defied her size. 400 pounds of maternal aggression accelerating through a gap that should have taken longer to cross. She covered the distance in under 2 seconds. Alder branches snapped like dry kindling. The ground shook. David was behind Renee. He had already begun reaching for the bear spray in the side pocket of his day pack, but a side pocket is not a holster. His fingers fumbled with the zipper, then the canister, then the safety tab. The sow was at 8 feet when he got the nozzle forward and pressed. A short, ragged burst of orange cloud erupted from the canister and caught the grizzly across the muzzle and eyes at contact range. The effect was immediate. The sow flinched hard, broke the line of her charge, veered left, and crashed through the alders back toward her cubs. The sound of her retreat was enormous. Cracking wood, a guttural bawl, the high-pitched bleating of the startled cubs. Then, silence. No one ran. That single decision, or perhaps the absence of a decision, the paralysis of adrenaline doing what conscious thought could not, may have mattered as much as the spray itself. Renee pulled both children behind her, pressing them low. David kept the canister raised, nozzle pointed at the wall of brush where the sow had vanished. They began backing toward the open power line corridor, one slow step at a time. The sow did not leave. For 40 seconds of visual contact, and 40 seconds when a grizzly is circling in the brush less than a stone's throw away, is not a number on a clock, but a geological age. She paced in a rough arc through the thicket, huffing, swatting the ground with her forepaw, orienting toward them, then away, then toward them again. The cubs stayed close to her flank, confused, milling. Then she gathered them. She turned uphill, and the three bears moved into heavier timber, and the sound of their passage faded, and the alders stopped shaking. The family reached the power line corridor. No one had been physically contacted by the bear. Aiden had a deep scrape on his forearm where a broken alder branch had caught him during the stumble. Renee would later describe a temporary hearing loss in her left ear from the sheer volume of the sow's vocalizations at close range. But they were standing. They were breathing. They were alive because of a handful of specific decisions made in the space of 10 seconds. And as the adrenaline began to ebb and the full shape of the encounter came into focus, it would become clear that not all of those decisions were good ones. They stepped back onto the open power line corridor, David with the bear spray still raised in both hands, Renee pressing Aiden and Maisie between herself and her husband's back. No one spoke. The orange residue of the spray hung in the still July air behind them, and somewhere uphill, beyond the wall of alders, the sow was still huffing. The encounter had lasted less than 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds did not end the way they did by accident. 3 decisions shaped the outcome, and each one deserves its own weight. The first was David's choice to carry bear spray at all. The Powerline Pass corridor is a trail he had walked since he was a teenager. He knew every switchback, every clearing, every stretch where the fireweed crowds the gravel. And still, that morning, he dropped a canister of counter-assault into his day pack. On a trail this familiar, most people leave the spray in the garage. David did not. That single decision gave the family its only effective deterrent when the sow closed to 8 feet. The second was pure accident. When Aiden stumbled backward into Renee, his momentum carried him directly away from the bear. Had he lurched sideways, a natural flinch, the sow could have interpreted lateral movement as flanking, a predatory behavior that would have escalated her response from defensive charge to contact. Instead, the boy fell in the one direction that did not amplify the threat. The third was the hardest. After the spray hit and the sow veered into the alders, every impulse in the human body screams, "Run." The barkers did not run. Renee held the children still. David kept the canister raised. They backed toward the corridor in slow, deliberate steps, maintaining visual contact with the circling sow for nearly 40 seconds until she gathered her cubs and climbed into heavier timber. That collective freeze denied the bear any further motion-based provocation. It may have been the decision that mattered most, but survival does not erase mistakes, and the mistakes deserve the same specificity. No one in the family spoke loudly or clapped while pushing through the off-trail alder thicket. In bear country, human voice is the simplest, most reliable alert system. It tells a bear that something bipedal is approaching, and most bears, even sows with cubs, will move off before the encounter ever happens. The barkers eliminated that system entirely. They moved through chest-high brush in near silence. The children wore earbuds. Aiden and Maisie were listening to music as they picked berries, which blocked exactly the ambient sound cues that could have bought the family precious seconds of warning. The crack of a branch under a heavy paw, the low huff of a feeding sow, the high chittering of cubs. Those sounds carry, but only if someone is listening. And the bear spray, the one piece of equipment that ultimately saved them, was buried in the side pocket of David's day pack. Not clipped to a chest strap, not holstered on his belt, stuffed behind a water bottle. When the sow charged, David lost critical seconds wrestling the canister free.
seconds during which the bear covered 20 feet of ground. He discharged the spray at 8 feet. Had the canister been chest-mounted, he could have deployed it at 20. Alaska Department of Fish and Game data shows that bear spray deployed at close range stops aggressive grizzly behavior in over 92% of documented field incidents, a success rate that exceeds firearms. The spray works, but only if it reaches the bear's face before the bear reaches yours. 3 weeks after the encounter, newly installed signage appeared along the Powerline Pass trailhead. Chugach State Park rangers posted warnings of active sow and cub activity in the corridor, recommending groups of 3 or more with spray accessible. The berry bushes were still heavy. The bears were still feeding. The Barkers returned to that same trailhead the following week.
Bear spray, chest-mounted on both adults. Bells on every pack. No earbuds. They walked the same trail, past the same salmonberry thickets, into the same July heat. David told a reporter from the Anchorage Daily News that the encounter lasted less than 10 seconds, but rearranged every assumption he held about trails he had hiked since childhood. 10 seconds. That is all it took to collapse the distance between familiarity and catastrophe. The Powerline Pass Trail still stretches southeast into Chugach State Park. The same gravel, the same fireweed, the same salmonberries ripening in the same late July sun. The bears still feed along those corridors. The cubs still follow their mothers through the alder thickets. Nothing about the trail has changed. Familiarity with a trail does not reduce the risk. It only reduces the vigilance that keeps the risk manageable. The trail stays the same. What changes is the awareness of the person walking it.